Hello and welcome. We have quite a bit of work to do today, so let's get right into it. Right now, the only difference now between the last videos is you're going to need to have your .env file. And if you don't have a .env file because maybe you started from one of these starters, you're going to need to make one. So if you want to go back a video and see what's inside of there, make sure you make your Mongoose connection string and so on, please do that first. Today, we're going to work on actually keeping our state in the front end because we're able to make requests to our API. And that's working very well, and we're getting data back, but we want to store that data in the front end so that we can use it. So we have this signup function here. We're going to hit this signup function and get some data back from it and store it. And just quickly, before we move on, we could see that here we did the user password is equal to null. We didn't do that in the signup. That is necessary. So new user dot password will equal null. So that won't get a password back to the front end either. We don't want that password coming across. Let's build out our two dependency folders. So we'll yarn in my after lesson 17 or whatever you might be on right here, and then we will cd into front end, and there we can yarn as well. Now inside of the front end, we're going to need to add a few packages. Here are the packages. We need Redux, so type yarn add, sorry about that. Now we'll need Redux. We will need react-redux. We're also going to need redux-devtools-extension. And I'll leave a link to where you could get the Redux DevTools extension. It's just an extension for your browser, and it helps us keep track of state in Redux. And finally, we have to add Redux Thunk. And let's just add all those in. I had a typo in this DevTools extension, so let me just do that one more time, and I'll fix that typo. Redux DevTools extension. Now we'll start our app up yarn run dev in the main folder. And here we are. It's looking right. We're going to go to login. I will bring up my console here, and let's see what type of information we get back when we make a user. Say we make w@w.com and we give that person a password. Let's check what we get back, and let's make sure we have something coming back. So when we do hit that route, we should get a send token. So we go up to our send token and see what's coming back is our cookie and a status of success, the token itself, and the user. This is what we're interested in, the user and the data involved with the user, such as in the future their Stripe ID or their past purchases or whatever we want to have on that user object. So let's see what that looks like on the Authenticate. So this is in SRC components auth in Authenticate. That's where we want to go to see what's going to happen. So in Authenticate, you can see if we go down a bit, we have our submit function, and what we're getting back is console.log, the result of awaiting that API post. So we'll get the result there and see what comes back in it. And let me type this out again. So that was w@w.com password. That's because I saved and it restarted. So submit. And here we are. Okay, so inside of this object we get back, there is a data, and it has the status token and the user. And the user has the information that we want, the clearance, the email, and the ID of the user. So let's just get back that now. So instead of returning res, it'll be res.data.user. Let's make sure that's working. So we'll sign up differently this time. I'll be q@q.com and type in a password for that person, sign up, and submit. And here we are. Now we just have the user's data. So this is what we want to keep on the front end so that we can interact with it and give the user an experience that's meant for just that user. So in comes Redux. If you're not comfortable with Redux and you want a crash course, I have a great crash course on my channel, and it will get you started For sure. We're going to work with Redux and Redux Thunk today, and if you'd like to just start with that and see if you're understanding it, that's just fine too. We're just not going to go through as thoroughly and as slowly and with as many diagrams as I did in that crash course. So feel free to go back to that one. I don't expect you to understand just from going through this, and if you do, that's great. So let's implement Redux. So inside of src, we'll make a folder in src called Redux. So folder Redux. And inside of there, there's several things to make, several different files to make. The first one I want to make is the store. So we'll write store.js. I also want to make a file in here called root-reducer.js. And this is where we'll combine all of our reducers because we'll have several of them. And again, if you don't understand Redux, take that crash course or just follow along here. The next file I need is, not in pages, in Redux is a folder, and that folder is going to be called actions. And another folder called reducers, and this is just for organizing everything. And finally, one more file called types.js. We're first going to make a type. So in types.js, export const get underscore user, and that will equal get underscore user as a string. So that's what we're doing with types. We're just defining variables for strings so we don't make any errors in typing later. We're going to need our types in our actions and in our reducers. We're going to make an action creator here, and it's going to be called user action. So a new file, user actions.js. Now, user actions is going to handle our authentication and updating a user, anything having to do with the user itself. Let's first import the type we just made, which was get underscore user, and we could get that from ... to types. And that's it. Now we're going to move all of our logic into this file. So export a const called sign up action. This will take an email and a password. And now we're pointing to Thunk. This is what lets us do async behavior, and we'll get into that in just a moment. So dispatch, async dispatch. And then we could point to the function that we've been using before in our authenticate here. So in authenticate, we have up on the top this submit, and we have our const body options. Everything from here we're going to grab. We'll go to user actions, and we're going to paste it all in. So if we follow this function here, what happens is our sign up action, where it takes in an email and a password, and then it's going to dispatch to our reducer the information that it gets back from the server, which happens right here. So everything stays the same until after the try here. And then we want to dispatch a type, and that's why we have these types for get underscore user, then comma to your payload, which will be your res.data.user, and that's the payload that we're sending across there. Of course, we don't need to do any sort of submit val here. We'll do that in our authenticate.js instead, so the URL will just be the signup URL since this is our signup action. Save that up and let's make our reducer now. So in reducers, make a new file. It'll be called user reducer.js. Now we're going to import that same type, that get user from ... types. Again, if this isn't making a lot of sense yet, it shouldn't. It's a lot of pieces getting put together, and you could go ahead and take that crash course if you're really lost. Now we'll have a const called initial state, and you don't need to capitalize this, I just like to. And then we'll have user, and the user's initial state will be an empty object. Now this is the state that our app will eventually be able to see. It'll be able to go to state.userReducer and find this. Let's make a const called user reducer, it's going to equal state, and initially that will equal the initial state, and then an action. Now we need to pull two things out of the action, and we could look at our action creator and see that we have a type and a payload coming from our action. So let's const type, comma, payload, and destructure it from action. Now this reducer is going to handle everything that we get from the user action. So there's going to be a lot of different types that it'll hit, and we'll do a switch statement to evaluate the types. So switch over the type, and then we will have cases for each type that it might be. So case get user, that is going to be and it looks like this when you do these cases. You just want to put a colon there, and after that, return ... state. So this is the state that we're returning up here. So we're returning the initial state just how it was. The user is still that empty object. And then what happens from there? We want the user to be payload. So now at first the state was still the initial state with user being an empty object. And now we updated it for user to be the payload. We always want to spread state because it's not just going to be user. There might be more information in here rather than just this one piece. Finally, we need to give it a default case. So default, and what happens in the default case is just going to return the state the way it is. Let's export this, export default user reducer. And now we have it set up so we could put it into our root reducer. So this will take in all of our reducers when there's, say, a cart reducer and an orders reducer, whatever there might be. There'll be several of them, and we want them all to be one large piece of state that we could reach into. So into root reducer, let's start defining this file. We're going to import combine reducers from Redux. We only have one reducer so far, so let's import that one reducer, user reducer from, and we just need to find it. It should be in reducers, user reducer. Now let's define this, const root reducer. It's going to equal a combine reducers call, and inside of the function here, inside of combine reducers, we're going to pass in any reducers that we have. We just have the user reducer. And after that, export default root reducer. And now we want to use this root reducer to create a store of the state. So we could save that up, go to store, and we'll get working inside of here. Inside of here, we're going to import create store and apply middleware from Redux. So we have that in. Let's also import compose with dev tools like so, and that's from Redux DevTools extension. And finally, we have import of that root reducer that we just made from, and let's find it, /reducers. Oh, that should be /root reducer. There it is. We also need Redux Thunk, so let's just bring that in quick. Import Redux Thunk from Redux Thunk. And we are good to go now. So we're going to have a const called middleware, and that's going to be where all the middlewares sit. It's going to be an array of middlewares. We just have Redux Thunk, so we'll just put Redux Thunk inside of there. We'll also have a const called store, and this is where we'll store all of our reducers. So create store, and inside create store, we're going to pass it the root reducer, and we're also going to pass it compose with DevTools. Inside of compose with DevTools is where we're actually going to apply our middleware. We could do it right here, apply middleware. open it up, and spread operator all those middlewares. So you can see what's happening there. We'll create a store with all the information from the root reducer, which combines all of our reducers. Right now it's just the user reducer. And the store will be composed with DevTools, and it's using a middleware which we defined up here, which is Redux Thunk. So let's export this. Export default store. And finally, we bring this all into our application. So here I'm going to import provider, and that's a capital P for provider, from react-redux. And I need that store as well. So let's import store from, and then we just need to find it, /to redux, and then to store. Now we have our provider and store. Now the fragment is no longer going to be a fragment, it's going to be a provider. Here we go, provider. It needs to be wrapped with the provider, and it is because I have that auto-completing. So in provider, we're giving it a store, and it's the store we brought in and defined. So now our app has the information it needs to look into Redux and see what's in the reducers. That comes from our combined reducer call in our root reducer. And I know this is a lot. Don't let this throw you too much. It's a lot of setup for some easy functionality, and you'll get very used to the functionality. You'll actually be used to that before you're used to the setup, because I'm still thrown by the setup sometimes, being that it is quite a few files. Let's see if this is working for us now. We could go in here, okay. And what I want to do is take this here and see where we're at. We have a state, it has a user reducer, and inside it is a user. Now this is, right over here, you could see, this is your, it doesn't want to come up, but Redux DevTools. Follow the link below this, or just type in Redux DevTools Chrome and you'll get that extension. We'll need that to kind of go through this video. It's really more helpful than a need. It shows you what's in your store at all times. Well, let's head into our Authenticate here. Now in Authenticate, we don't want to be doing all this logic anymore. I'm going to just get rid of all of that. Keep the prevent default. You don't want the page to reload. Head up to the top and let's bring some stuff in. We'll import, and you know we're going to need to bring in the API inside of our action creator. So just a mental note on that. We'll import sign up action. I think we called it that from, and it should be back to inside of Redux inside of actions and user actions. I'm just quickly going to check that we called it sign up action. Yes, we did. Back to Authenticate, we have our sign up action. Now let's get that set up within our submit here. So in order to use an action, we need to dispatch it. So we need to get a dispatch function, which comes from use dispatch. And that is in the file react-redux. Perfect. And just a quick setup on that. Const dispatch equals use dispatch, the function. Just invoke that. Now we have our dispatch, and anytime we want to dispatch a function at all, like this one, we just wrap it in dispatch. So on submit, what we're going to do is dispatch, and then we'll wrap sign up action, and we need to pass in the email and the password. And it caught our error right away. The API is not defined in the user actions. I was just mentioning that. So that's in utils API. Let's go to the user actions and make that change. So here we are. We'll have an import of API from, and let's find it. That is in utils API. Now that we're connected to the state, connected to Redux, and we're actually triggering an action from our Authenticate component here, we can go ahead and give it a shot, because on submit, it's going to dispatch the sign up action with the email and password, which means it will be inside of the user actions in sign up action, pass in the email and password, and it's going to make the call, await API post with the body, which has the email and password and the URL. And then we're going to dispatch a type of get user with the payload of that user to store inside of our user reducer, which will go right here. So let's give that a shot and see if it's working. We will sign up another user, z@z.com, with a password and sign that person up. Here we are. It did come back. That is good. We know that the function is still working, but let's check that it actually wound up in Redux. And it did. You could see that we now have, this is the difference. We'll go to the state. We now have a user reducer with a user inside of it, and that's our user, that's the ID, and that is the email. Perfect. This is working great. We implemented Redux. I know that's a lot. I know that's a pain. And if it is a little difficult, please go watch that crash course I have. I will link it below this and you could check it out. But now that it's implemented, it's very easy to work with, and I'm going to show you how simple it is to work with right now. So we have our sign up. Let's also implement our login function in our user actions. The first thing I'm going to do is take options out of this function. We don't need it here. Almost all of our post calls are going to be content type application JSON. So I'm just going to set options right up here because otherwise we'll have to define options over and over and over again in every one of these exports. So let's do one more export. It'll be a const called login action. It's going to take the same things, an email and a password. It will be an async dispatch. And the async dispatch, this is Thunk. So when we're pointing to this, we're pointing to Thunk itself. It allows us to do async behavior within Redux. Otherwise, you can't do that. You can't do async behavior within Redux, but it is a little bit simpler. Again, check out my video for a bigger explanation. So we'll need that same body and a different URL. Let me just make this a little cleaner here. This doesn't need to be on 2 lines, just so we can get it all kind of on the same screen. There we go. We need the same body and we need a different URL. So the body will be the same. The URL will go to login. We're going to try this exact same thing as well. So let's take this, pop it in there. Now we're going to try an API post to this new URL that we put in with the body, the email and password, and then we'll dispatch the get user with the res.data.user. So if we log in, we should have all of the user information as well, and it should get into our reducer and be available to us through the entire app. Let's give that a shot by going to Authenticate and setting up something for this submit val. So we'll do a ternary with this submit val. If it's login, we'll go to login. Otherwise, we will go to the other one. So we have dispatch for sign up. So let's do submit val triple equal to login. And that is our question. If that's the case, we are going to dispatch. And it won't be sign up action, it'll be login action. This is going to auto import for me. So if it doesn't for you, if you don't have login action up here, please put it in there. So dispatch login action for that. And then our OR statement is right here. We'll dispatch sign up action if the submit val is not login. So we could save that and go to our app and let's try this out. Okay, right now we should have nothing in our state. Yes, we have a user reducer with a user that is just an empty object. So let's log in because I made z@z.com and the person has a password as well, and we'll log in. We are in, we got something back. Let's make sure that it is in our state as well. Here we are. Yes, we have a user now with the clearance level and everything else about that user. And we hit the login instead. We can even prove that. Just go right into your actions and just define it right up top. Say console.log login. It'll know that you hit the login action there. So I'll do it one more time with that up, z@z.com. And we are good, and we went to the login function that time. Okay, great. So this is what we're going to be doing. I know that was a lot. To get into Redux, it scares a lot of people away. But if you know Redux, you're going to be significantly more employable, and your projects can get a lot larger and be easier to manage. So we're going to learn it through repetition. We're going to write a lot of functions, and you'll see where it makes your app better and more easy to deal with in just a bit. Great job in this lesson, and keep coding.